guys, welcome back to the channel. So today, we're back to work on our 2017 Grand Sport Corvette. And this car has been riding absolutely terrible over the last couple of weeks. We took a look underneath, both rear shocks are leaking, they're both blown. So today, we're gonna replace them. So we'll get started by removing the rear wheel. It's a nice narrow tire on the rear. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is unplug the shock. So this is on the bottom of the frame rail. This is the plug that goes onto the vehicle harness. And you'll want to take a small little screwdriver like this, pry down on this central tab that's gray in color. So you'll pry down here on this tab like that. And then you'll pull backwards. The tab actually comes out of the other side of the clip on this side. So we'll pull on that gray tab while prying down right here. And that's what's going to release this connection. There it goes. You can see that slid backwards now, right? There it goes. So I also was pulling just at that last step right there. Not only was the gray clip out, which locks it in place, I actually pried right there as well. See how that's another clip? So the gray clip is like a locking mechanism. And then you have this clip as well, which goes over that tab right there on the shock clip. The next step is to remove the lower shock bolt, but before we do that, we're going to relieve a little bit of tension on the shock by raising the lower control arm using a floor jack. There we go, that should do the trick. Okay, here's a look at that lower shock bolt. It's a 13/16, so we'll go ahead and spin that off. There we go. The next step is to remove these upper shock bolts. They're 18mm in size. They are threaded into an aluminum chassis. I don't really like to use impact tools with aluminum threads, so I'm just going to do these by hand. And I've already broken them loose with a breaker bar. To get the shock absorber out, I'm going to lower the jack down a little bit, and that'll give us enough room to slide it out. So now that it's lowered, we should be able to twist the shock absorber and get it out. Here's a look at the shock absorber on this side. This side, you can tell it was leaking a little bit. There's a little bit of gunk buildup. But let me show you the other side, and that's the one that really led us to replacing these two shocks. Here's a look at the one from the driver's side of the car, and you can see all of the grease that's leaked out. So this shock is completely blown. You do always want to replace your shocks in pairs, and the one on the passenger side here didn't exactly look great either. Here's a look at our new shock. We did notice one difference on the new shock. So on both the driver's and passenger side, it's the same part number, and this nut actually faces the back of the car on the passenger side, where it used to face the front of the car on the passenger side on the original OEM shock. All that means is that we'll have to feed the bolt in from the front instead of the back. I didn't see any other differences. We did double check, and there is only one part number listed, so I'm guessing this was just a change made in the aftermarket. So we'll go ahead and feed in our new shock. wire should go behind the shock, like that. So there's a little channel behind the shock that the wire can rest in. We'll go ahead and get one of these top bolts started just to hold everything up. Next up, we'll get our second top bolt in. All right, so we've just got both of the top bolts snugged up. We'll come back to torque these after we get the bottom bolt in. Okay, so in order to get this bottom bolt in, we placed the jack back under the lower control arm and jacked it up until the hole in that lower control arm lined up with the hole in the shock. So now I'll go ahead and thread this in now from the front of the car though, because of this nut being on the back side. Okay, so we've got that bolt snugged up. We don't want to torque this bolt until we have the weight of the car onto this lower control arm, or onto this wheel really. So we'll hold off on torquing it just for a minute. I should also note that if you do have your brake cooling ducts installed on the rear wheels, you'll have to remove those in order to get a wrench onto the front of this bolt. Now that we've got all of the shock bolts installed and snugged up, we'll go ahead and torque the top bolts. And the torque spec on these is 74 foot-pounds. There we go. All right, so we've lowered the bridge jack so that all of the weight of the car is resting on the jack here on the lower control arm on this side and the wheel on the other side. So the car is actually sitting on its own suspension, and now we can torque the lower shock bolt. And the torque spec on this lower shock bolt is 118 foot-pounds. There we go. And the last step is to reconnect the wiring harness. So this should just snap together. There it was. And then we'll push that gray lock-in position. So we saw that come through. And the new shock does come with a new pin that goes up into the frame. So we'll align that right there and push it in. Perfect. The last step is to put the wheel on. And we'll torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. All right guys, thanks for watching. I think we've caught up on all of the maintenance on this Corvette. In the next video, we'll be back to work on the truck. Please like and subscribe.